everyone, my name is Roya and this is my guide to mastering French pronunciation. I'm putting together a list of all of my favorite tips and tricks to help you figure out how to pronounce all of the most difficult letters and sounds in French. Before I jump into the pronunciation, I want to preface this by saying I am not a native French speaker. However, I do have very good French pronunciation. I've been told this by many French people, so I'm confident in my ability to help teach you pronunciation. And while I do think it is so critical to learn languages from native speakers, there can be an advantage to learning from non-native speakers. For example, a native speaker didn't have to consciously learn the language that they speak. They learned it as a baby or a toddler, and they don't necessarily know how they learned the pronunciation that they did, how they learned the grammar or the words that they did. They just did and picked it up naturally. However, people like myself have gone through exactly what you're going through. I know what it's like to struggle through certain pronunciations because I had to figure that out myself as well, consciously and later in life. So I just want to say I completely advocate for learning from native speakers as well, but I hope that I can provide a different perspective as a non-native speaker of French. And with that, here's my guide to all of the most difficult letters and sounds to pronounce in French. The first thing that I want to start out with today is not a letter or combination of letters at all. It's actually your mouth shape while you speak. So I think that this forms the basis for all pronunciation. And in fact, if you are trying to pronounce something but you use a different mouth shape, that can affect how the sound comes out. So for example, how this was explained to me is that English is a very smiley language and a very open mouth language. So when I'm speaking English, as you can tell, I'm just a smiley person in general, so I smile a lot while I talk. I really cannot even help it. But the corners of my mouth are a lot more wide. And we also tend to open our mouth a lot wider when speaking English. And compare that with French, which has a lot more closed sounds, and you have your lips almost pursed out or puckered when you speak. When you're speaking French, try to consciously make your mouth into a different shape while you're speaking. Think of like an ooh sound, or pulling forward instead of up and out and wide. So English, up, out, and wide, and French is more pursed together or closed sound. And being able to consciously move your mouth a bit while you're speaking French in general is going to help your pronunciation overall. To give you an example, I'm going to introduce myself and tell you my age in English and then in French, and I want you to pay attention to how my mouth moves and where my lips are. Hello, my name is Roya and I am 29 years old. Bonjour, je m'appelle Roya et j'ai 29 ans. As you could tell in French, my mouth was a lot more closed, my lips were pursed and more forward, whereas in English, I opened my mouth wider and not just in the upward direction, but also left to right as well, in more of a smiley shape. So that's something that I think is just important to think about while you're pronouncing and speaking French. The more that you can try to keep your mouth more closed and forward, the more that's going to help your pronunciation overall. Now to get into the letters. So I'm going to start with a couple of vowel sounds, and then in the latter half of this video, I'm going to focus on consonants. And because in this video, I want to focus on just the most difficult sounds to learn, I'm going to skip over most of the vowels because their sounds exist pretty similarly in English, except for one, and that's where I'm going to start, and that is the letter U. I think the letter U in French is one of the most difficult sounds to pronounce. So here is the exact way that I learned to pronounce the letter U. So I want you to think about what you learned as a kid for the sound that a monkey makes. I know it sounds silly, but that ooh, ooh, ah, ah, that ooh part, that sounds actually quite a lot like the letter U in French. It's not quite there, but what it makes you do is it makes you have more of a closed mouth sound than you normally would for the letter U in English. From there, I also want you to think about ew, like, oh, that's so gross, ew, ew. But now you want to have more of a closed mouth, forward lips, like you would do with that silly monkey sound. So instead of ooh, ooh, ah, ah, or instead of ew, which is more open, now you can go ew, ew, ew. And now to put it into practice, let's practice with the number 8 in French, which is huit. We are often taught in English to think of this as wheat, like what you make flour from, which isn't that far off base. It's not a terrible pronunciation by any means, but it's not quite there either. So I want you to think of that monkey sound and mixed with ew, and then you have u, and then eat at the end, eat, eat. And slow it down if you need to. Practice. If you're at home, I encourage you to make the silly monkey sound when no one's watching. For me, it really helped with pronunciation. Next up is nasal sounds, which I think are a lot easier to learn than you might think. These are the sounds for IN, AN, ON, and UN. I'm gonna focus specifically on IN because I think this is the easiest sound to learn. This is the sound for pain, like bread, or fin, like the end. And from there, once you master that sound, you can then move your mouth slightly to get the and un. And what I think is the easiest way to learn these sounds is by imitating a buzzer noise in a basketball game. So the seconds tick down, time's up, and it goes eh. That's actually, as silly as it sounds, very close to the nasal sounds that you need to make in French as well. So instead of that's really open, close it a little bit more and just think And then once you get that sound down, the you can move your mouth just a little bit to get some of these other sounds like on, like bon, or un, like brun, because they all have a very similar placement of where you get that sound. Next up is the sound which is spelled EU. And so this is part of some of the most famously difficult words to pronounce in the French language. Think of heureux or heureuse. That uses that sound twice. So the way that I learned how to pronounce this sound is by imagining being punched in the stomach. So if you think about somebody hitting you and the sound that you would make, it's That will help you utilize your diaphragm. And then you also want to have your tongue placed over your bottom teeth and kind of closing your airway. So that'll look like this, where you have your tongue almost up against your lips. Your mouth is going to be pretty much closed, and it'll be So then once you practice that sound, and you can even place your hand on your diaphragm to feel the movement of your diaphragm if that's helpful to you, so you can make that sound. So heureux, heureuse, and you can say after that that you are happy. And now I'll move on to probably the most famously difficult letter to pronounce in French. It's the one that I get questions on all of the time, is how do you pronounce the French R? The French R appears all over the place, so mastering it is really key to having good French pronunciation. It's in bonjour and merci, which are some of the most common words that you're going to use when speaking French. And in my case, I think I was probably forced to learn it because it's in my name, which in English is Roya, but in French is Roya. And how I was taught to pronounce the French R is by thinking about hawking a loogie. So if you are making an exaggerated, like cartoon character version of hawking a loogie, you are going to go in the back of your throat. And that is similar, not quite the same, but it is similar to the French R sound, and it's going to help you master the French R. So that, once you get that, then I want you to try to start inserting it into French words, but do it in a really elongated and exaggerated way. This is not how you want to speak on a daily basis. This is not how French people speak, but it'll help you get used to using that sound in the middle or in the end of a word. For example, I want you to start saying merci, bonjour, merci, bonjour. Merci was something that was actually really a hard one for me to learn, and it took a lot of time. So I would walk around my house just going merci, merci. And once you have that merci, then you start shortening it little by little. And you can go from merci to merci to merci, merci. And there you have it. Next up is the letter L, which is not often talked about enough if you ask me, but I think it's a very easy switch to make that will also help your French pronunciation. So in English, the L sound is very close to your teeth. So when I say L, like library, my tongue is basically in the middle of my teeth, or you might have it at the back of your teeth. But in essence, the tongue is very forward in your mouth. So the French L is actually further back in your mouth than the English L. So instead of saying library or L, you want to say L, L, and put the top of your tongue towards the middle of the roof of your mouth instead of towards the front. Just to give you an example of a word so you can compare the L, I want to talk about library and librairie. But librairie does not mean library, it means a bookstore, so it's a bit of a false friend. So if you noticed, in the French librairie, my tongue was not at the front of my mouth anymore. And that would make the difference between saying librairie and librairie. Or it could be the difference in the sound of ville versus ville. And the further back you put your tongue, the more of a French sounding L it is. And then last one on the list today is the double L. And what I think is tricky about the double L in French is that sometimes it makes an L sound or an L sound, but sometimes it makes more of a Y sound, a Y. So to try to remember how to pronounce the double L, for the most part, if it comes after an I, think of it as a Y sound. So think of it as an I double L instead of just the double L. There are a few famous exceptions like ville, but there are about, 1 to 2 dozen exceptions. But for the most part, if you have I-L-L-E, that's gonna make a Y sound. And why I wanted to talk about the double L sound is 1, because of that inconsistency. And then 2, because some of the most famously difficult words to pronounce in French have this sound in it. A common word like feuille, which means a leaf, but is often used for a sheet, like a sheet of paper, une feuille de papier, that has not only the Y sound, but one of the sounds from earlier, which is the E sound, and you need to combine those together. So I want you to think about the sound that we did, the E sound, and how that goes into now a Y sound. E, Y. So you just kind of close your mouth from the E sound to make the feuille. So then from there you have une feuille de papier. And to wrap this all up, one of the most famously difficult words in French is squirrel or écureuil. And this actually utilizes a lot of the sounds that we just talked about today, because you have the R, the U sound, you have E, and you also have the L sounding like a Y. So if you put all of these together and you slow it down, you should be able to, after this video, pronounce the infamous écureuil. And there you have it. Those were all of the letters and sounds that I think are the most difficult to learn in French. Thank you so much for watching. And if you haven't already, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'd also love to know in the comments what you thought, if this was helpful to you, if you think I missed any difficult letters, or if you have any other requests for things that you're struggling with in French. I would be happy to put together more mini French lessons just like this one. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.